There's a story told about Ben Franklin when he went to France as ambassador in 1776. There was a lot of doubt whether France would support America in the war, and we needed the support. So Franklin took a kind of risky move that diplomacists today are still talking about. Lee Perez works for the State Department. She runs the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs.
He didn't wear a wig.
That was the move. Ben Franklin did not powder his head. Instead, he wore a beaverskin cap, the 18th century equivalent of wearing flip-flops to work.
So, in a sense, he made a laughingstock of himself, but he actually used a kind of counterculture approach in helping him persuade the French to support us during the Revolutionary War.
Franklin's hat helped sell the New World. It's fresh and rugged, sexily frontier, like an SUV ad for American democracy.
We Americans are something new, and new generations of us are developing.
Of course, America has always been about having the new thing. It was during the Cold War that exporting it became actual government policy, part of the battle for men's minds.
American forms of dancing, American things, the movies, the jukebox, hot dogs.
Even the CIA got involved. The agency secretly financed an exhibition of Jackson Pollock and subsidized intellectual magazines like Parisian Review to show we weren't all cars and chewing gum. And to counter Soviet propaganda about American racism, Eisenhower sent out a tour of Porgy and Bess.
It ain't necessarily so.
Even jazz was more than just music.
Time for jazz. Willis Conover in Washington, D.C. with the Voice of America Jazz Hour.
The Jazz Hour launched in 1955, and its host, Willis Conover, became the most popular voice on state-sponsored Voice of America until his death in 1996.
Let me just ask you a first question, the most basic question I can think of, which is, what is jazz?
It's another form of speech, jazz is. A musical parallel to American democracy at its best. It's a kind of self-disciplined freedom.
If jazz was the air campaign in the culture war, librarians made up the ground troops. Hundreds of them were dispatched by the U.S. Information Agency, formed after the Second World War. It was maybe the most ambitious campaign for cultural diplomacy that America ever attempted. At its peak, there were over 250 American libraries around the world. Don Hausrath built at least 30 of them. He was a librarian in Southern California when he decided to join the agency. It was 1971.
This was the era of super graphics, and we had, these rainbow colors running all over the walls, and it was just spectacular. And so in Japan, fashion models were being brought into our libraries and posed there for contemporary-looking backdrops. And that was the idea, that America's an exciting, interesting place, and the libraries reflected it. Anybody that's worked overseas knows almost all the books in libraries abroad are behind glass cases. And if you're a faculty member, you get access to X, Y, and Z. But if you're a student, you may not even get access to them. So this were open stacks, beautifully designed, that you just wouldn't find in most places overseas. It was free. It was accessible. It was current. It was not Uncle Sam's information, although that was also available.
Did you see your role there as patriotic? Did you feel like you were part of the Cold War?
Of course. Well, we were representing America and the best part of America. The thinkers, the poets, the writers, the scientists. This is where you could find out about that strange culture called America. We were setting up libraries in the Baltics. I think it was Estonia. A representative in their legislature walked in and said, "Do you have a copy of the U.S. Constitution?" We not only did, we also had a translation. So they used it in working up their Constitution. There's that level on one side, and then you had the journalists, the students, the opinion leaders, the poets, the writers, the filmmakers. They would be using this stuff.
The library served one other role, a neutral zone, where local elites could safely mingle with American diplomats. Bill Rue was a former ambassador to the Middle East, and in the 1960s, he was a foreign officer in Cairo.
I would go over there in order to have a chance to meet students and professors and professionals who came and used the library. And I remember I met a couple of university professors and invited them to my home, and one of them said, well, he'd meet me at the Cultural Center. That person was Boutros Ghali, who later became Secretary General of the United Nations. Another person I met was Atif Abeid, who later became Prime Minister of Egypt.
All Bill's stories seem to go like this. He met everybody before they were somebody.
And the man was Anwar Sadat, who later became President of Egypt.
But when the library program ended, those connections became harder to make. The first cutbacks began in the late 80s. The Hearts and Minds campaign was supposed to be over. Exchange programs dwindled. And then came the internet. Websites could serve some of the same role for free. More libraries shut their doors. In 1999, the whole U.S. Information Agency was dissolved, folded into the State Department. Bill Rue visited Cairo last year.
What was left of their library facility was inside the embassy itself, which had been built as a bunker, as a fortified facility, impervious to any kind of attack, and also impervious to Egyptian visitors. Visitors would be required to identify themselves at the outer perimeter gate of the embassy compound, surrender their cell phones, and be escorted into what remained of the library. And it really wasn't much of a library. It didn't have much facilities. It was not used. And the public affairs officer told me that people never came to visit him either.
There aren't many standalone libraries left. We do have a downsized version, though, a little arrangement. We occupy a corner of existing libraries. It's called the American Corners Project. Karen Hughes recently toured some of them. In the photos, she and her host seem to squeeze into the little space, trying not to bump knees or disturb the flags left out on the table. Of course, it's not like the State Department has stopped trying to advertise democracy. You remember the pro-Western television station that we launched? The one Congress spent $100 million for in 2003? The idea was pretty familiar. You line up the powerhouses of pop culture, the movie studios, sports franchises, send that over to the Middle East, along with pro-Western news. It was called Al-Hurra. In a way, it made a kind of sense. Satellite TV is huge in the region. It's everywhere. Satellite dishes even replaced jewelry as the Bedouin nomad wedding present of choice. And so, as in the past, America trotted into the fray.
You know, when they first launched Al-Hurra, if I can describe to you the commercial, what did they show you?
Jamal Dajani produces the Middle East Media Watch for Link TV.
They showed you this woman sitting in a dark house. She opens her window looking towards the west and she sees light, you know. So basically you're telling them that they are trapped in their backwardness and then you have to look west to be free.
But the Arab world didn't see themselves as living in darkness. The Middle East has over 200 satellite TV channels from around the world, and Al-Hurra made some goofy mistakes early on. A rally in Fallujah for the cleric al-Sadr was identified as a birthday party. News stories came late, or not at all. But maybe the cultural stuff, the fun stuff, would bring in the viewers.
The quality of its programming was ridiculous. They had shows during the war where people were tuned in to see what's going on, and they'd be showing you something like about Hollywood, you know, Hollywood stars, etc. So they were really out of touch of the Arab street.
My problem with Al-Hurra is that it's not competitive. It hasn't become a player in the Arab world.
Bill Rue studied a lot of Arab TV. He's the ambassador we heard from earlier. He says unlike the American libraries of old, which were sometimes the only place you could find certain books, the culture on Al-Hurra isn't really new.
Arabs who have watched Al-Hurra have said, why are you giving us cooking shows? We have our own cooking shows, and America's a superpower. Why don't you give us something useful?
The founder of Al-Hurra resigned this year, and Karen Hughes seems to be taking a different tack, sending over more cultural ambassadors like Louisiana jazz bands and hip-hop groups. and increasing the budget for exchange programs and scholarships. But in a way, Karen Hughes has a tougher job than Ben Franklin ever did. And American culture used to mean something different in the world. Even a generation ago, just crossing the Iron Curtain felt countercultural. A pair of jeans was political. It's kind of what America's best at, selling stuff that makes life here look cool. In 1916, Woodrow Wilson urged a conference of salesmen to go out and sell the goods that would make the world more comfortable and happy, and so convert them to the principles of America. We're still trying to convert people. So maybe the connection between American goods and goodwill toward America wasn't as tight as Wilson hoped. And then what really gets us in trouble is when we try to sell democracy itself. That's what feels like propaganda, and what nobody seems to be buying.